Okay, it's my pleasure to introduce the next panel. We're going to be led by Big Sky 55 Plus member and Vice Chair Jon Ellingson. John loves being a Montanan. He served as a legislator and a Senate Majority Leader. He's worked as Assistant AG with Mike McGrath and Steve Bullock, and he worked for ACLU and prison reform, LGBTQ rights, and Native American voting rights. He's a wonderful asset to our board, and so excited to introduce him to introduce the next panel.
Thanks, Carrie. As you have guessed by now, I'm not Mary Moe. But I'm really pleased to be able to introduce this panel, and it is timely to say the least. The title of the panel is Global Perspectives on the Building Blocks of Democracies. These are fraught times that we live in right now, and many of us are questioning whether or not our democracy will withstand the stress test that it is being imposed upon it. I am reminded of things that have served as my North Star as I've been in political life from our history. The first one being Thomas Jefferson's great words in the Declaration of Independence that all people are created equal. And we are entitled to equal political rights under that belief. And I'm reminded of the sage words of Benjamin Franklin at the conclusion of the drafting of our Constitution, that we have a republic if we can keep it. I sure as hell hope that we can keep it. And we have three people who can give us some perspective on the best way that we could keep it. They are Dave Hunter, who is a legend in Montana politics. We have Susan DeCamp, who can give us a particular perspective from her point of view, and Morgan Taylor. First up will be Susan DeCamp. Susan graduated from MSU Billings and worked for the Montana Association of Churches, Yellowstone Public Radio, and Community 7. She held a position at the International Center for Agricultural Research in dry areas in Syria, and then Genomics International, doing international development work in Afghanistan. She spent 10 years as a Foreign Service officer for USAID and served in Afghanistan, Nepal, and Haiti. She will have 10 minutes. Our next speaker will also have 10 minutes. We'll have three speakers with 10 minutes each. We will, after they speak, we're going to move over to the chairs, and we are going to bounce ideas off of the three speakers, and then we're going to open it up to questions from the floor. We've got a lot to cover in just a little over an hour. So first up at bat, Susan, will you want to take over?
So happy to be here today, and thank you. Thank you for coming. My name is Susan DeCamp, and I'm here to talk about the agency formerly known as the United States Agency for International Development. I was a Foreign Service officer for USAID for 15 years, and before that I spent 5 years in international development, and then I retired from USAID in 2020. As you know, USAID was dismantled last year by Elon Musk, who said that USAID was rife with waste, fraud, and abuse. I don't remember seeing any evidence, but I know firsthand that this was not true. This is my bona fides. I was there. So, USAID was created by President Kennedy in 1961 to advance peace and unite U.S. national security by stabilizing developing countries that were struck by disaster. USAID investments supported humanitarian aid, responded to disease outbreaks, and performed a wide range of development around the world. We support the development of democracy to help countries become more stable, sustainable, and economically prosperous. We help develop systems and institutions. Averting famine and disease meant that people could get back on their feet and did not have to become refugees to stay alive. They were less likely to fall prey to dictators and warlords, and in particular, after the war with Russia and its civil war, Afghanistan had become a safe haven for terrorists like Osama bin Laden, which is why USAID was there. Oh, I should have jumped sooner, but that's President Kennedy. Okay. In 2024, the budget for USAID was approximately $24 billion. That adds up to about 1.2% of federal spending. And I'd like to point out, by way of perspective, that President Trump gave Argentina $40 billion. $20 billion went to the president for God knows what, and the other $20 billion went to purchase Argentinian currency to prop it up. So, Americans have been divided on foreign assistance for a long time. And then here in the chart toward the end, you can see it's kind of roughly 1/3 each. You know, sometimes they want more foreign aid, sometimes they want less, sometimes they want it to stay the same. And then increasingly, people didn't want any foreign aid at all because the United States has its own problems to solve. And that's fine. It's a good discussion, something that should be discussed between citizens, it should be discussed with Congress, and it's a discussion worth having, including reform. You know, there's a thing in between no agency and agency, and that is specific reforms that have not been explored. USAID was working in 120 different countries, and we saved millions of lives. And if you go online and look at the global poverty figures, they have been steadily decreasing over time. And let's see if that stays. In Afghanistan, USAID was part of the International Counterinsurgency Strategy, the Coalition of the Willing. The military focus was on protecting the population from terrorists and supporting tribal communities. It was a hearts and minds approach. My first assignment was to the provincial reconstruction teams. These were small bases placed all over the country to provide a comprehensive perspective on stabilization. My first base was in Farah, down over at the other side. It's on the border of Iran. And we served with the National Guard from the United States, some Navy Seabees, the Italian Army, that was a great one, and then the Department of State. I also served with the 82nd and 101st Airborne before becoming development advisor to the ISAF command group in Kabul. The military regarded USAID and State Department as soft power, force multipliers. As a PRT, I kept the military informed of the development efforts to share in their area of responsibility, and we designed small projects for the local community together. It was in Iraq and Afghanistan that the U.S. government started hiring unprecedented numbers of private contractors. Corporations like Halliburton, Kellogg Brown and Root, Blackwater, Global Security, they were ubiquitous. While our troops were earning $35,000 to $40,000 a year, security contractors were earning well over $100,000. Today, the military budget is increasingly going to these private security contractors, companies like Palantir, for example. Today, the military budget is increasingly going to them, and they have top secret security clearances, and they are not auditable. You can't audit it. There's zero transparency in what's being bought and what's being sold. So there's no oath to the Constitution. They serve no one but themselves. My military colleagues referred to security contractors as self-licking ice cream cones. And today, those same security contractors are providing bodies for ICE agents. Okay. After working with the military for over 3 years, I went into the embassy in Kabul and became director of a women's empowerment program called Promote. Undisputedly, the education of women is the most effective development dollar you can invest. Educating women is educating children, is supporting families, and is supporting democracy. Promote was funded by a special congressional appropriation at approximately $250 million. That's a lot of money. The goal was to educate, train 75,000 Afghan women over 5 years. We trained young women to be civil servants and to work for the government. We trained ultrasound technicians, midwives, entrepreneurs wanting to open their own business and export their goods. And the program met all its goals. It was a resounding success. But you'll never hear about it, you never learn about it, because we are not allowed to promote our own success, we're not allowed to lobby Congress, we are not allowed to talk to the press at all, unless we get permission from Washington, D.C. So, let's see. Why was USAID shut down? Why was the Voice of America shut down? Why is the U.S. military being replaced with private contractors? We're all civil servants. We take an oath to the Constitution. No one can do everything perfectly all the time. But whatever we did it for all the right reasons. We did it for our country. It's important not to confuse politics with government. Politics have been dismantling and degrading public service agencies that provide important services to the American people, and they do it for far less than what we are paying private contractors to replace these services or degrade them. USAID is gone. Soft power like development and diplomacy is disappearing. When the military is the only tool left in your tool chest, everything becomes a war. And peace is always less expensive than war. Those who profit from war don't share. In closing, during the first Afghanistan election in 2004, I went to the Ministry of Women's Affairs to watch the women vote for the first time in their lives. I walked into the ministry courtyard wearing the native costume of my people, jeans and sneakers, and right away they knew where I was from. And they were so happy. They came up to us, they hugged us, they told us thank you 1,000 times. They were incredibly grateful, and they had a voice. It broke my heart when the U.S. walked away after talks with the Taliban, and when the Taliban took over, one of the first things they did was deny education to the girls again. So talk about waste. Okay, so I hear a lot about how nothing happened in Afghanistan. This was my Promote program and how much went to specific genres of programming for women, government, economy, civil society. This was just the business program, Women in the Economy, and this was an export program where we brought in vendors and the women sold and signed contracts with those vendors in other countries. So $7 million in sales in 2018. This is Kabul when I got there, 2002, and the whole city looked like this. It was an unrelenting pile of rubble. And this is a picture of Kabul today. So, thank you very much for your attention. I appreciate it. Yep.
Thank you, Susan, for those insightful and heartfelt comments on your work in Afghanistan. Next up, we have Dave Hunter. David Hunter is a longtime state government official in Montana and political consultant. I can't begin to, I don't think any of us could begin to count the number of politicians that you've advised in your long career, David. He's recently been spending his time working for the National Democratic Institute, espousing the strength and performance of parliamentary systems of democracy in Africa, Eastern Europe, and Central and South Asia. He brings decades of excellent and sharp experience to both national and international affairs. Dave, we're looking forward to your comments.
Mostly I tell people that my resume looks like I can't hold a job. Because when you work for elected officials, your term of office is the same as theirs. I've had the opportunity in the last 15 years to work for the National Democratic Institute. It is really how the State Department has funded pro-democracy work in America. There is a equivalent Republican organization called the International Republican Institute, headed for 25 years by Senator McCain. NDI headed by Madeleine Albright, again funded by USAID, almost defunct in today's world. But really, the irony is both of those institutions created by Ronald Reagan because Ronald Reagan believed that pro-democracy work ought to be done in a transparent way, funded through the State Department, subject to congressional oversight, as opposed to funded by dark money through CIA, which was how it was done before Reagan. Again, ended by the Trump administration, but NDI has a great history, still exists, hopefully will come back someday. But I've spent 15 years doing this. I've had the opportunity to work with Russian dissident parties, to work in Ukraine, to work with Aung San Suu Kyi's party in Myanmar. So, a couple of observations. First of all, I think we have to recognize the world has changed. Said best to me by the former foreign minister from Australia, who I happened to have breakfast with in Myanmar, who said to me, that Australia has participated in every war that America has been involved in. Australia has sent troops to support America. He said, look, we understand that democracies make mistakes. But if you re-elect Donald Trump, America's relationship with Australia will change. I think that's true of many countries in the world. They don't see the difference between Donald Trump and America. They don't trust America because we re-elected him. So our path forward in the world is different. Secondly, my observation would be our challenge is that corruption is what's corrosive to democracy. That when you believe that your elections have been stolen, when you believe that government is corrupt, then there's no reason to participate, right? There's no reason to believe that the democracy or the government serves you. And in fact, the primary reason authoritarians are successful is they promise to end corruption, right? Think of Donald Trump's, I'm going to drain the swamp. I mean, so what do we have to do? Well, First of all, we have to restore some sense that American elections are valid. I mean, when I was a kid, right, there's the League of Women Voters. I mean, we have to have some mechanism to make people believe, again, that elections have not been stolen, that we have integrity in this system. Secondly, we need to prosecute corruption. We have to make people in America believe that corruption has consequences, right? We don't experience the corruption that people do in most countries, right? I've never had to pay to get my driver's license. I've never had to pay a bribe to get a government document processed. Most people in many developing countries have. But somehow, we believe that corruption is rife. Well, we need to we need to be more aggressive about prosecuting corruption. Secondly, in NDI, we have always said that democracy is as strong as the legislative branch, right? In today's world, our legislative branch at the congressional level has abandoned its role in the balance of power. We have to make our legislature stand up, or our Congress stand up to the role. And quite frankly, I think probably we have to abandon the primary system we have in America. Voters in America are increasingly sorting themselves out geographically as well as ideologically. A majority of seats in the United States Congress, a majority of seats in the Montana legislature are now single-party seats. Whoever wins the primary is the person who's going to be elected. If we allow the extreme edge who votes in primaries in both parties to select our members of Congress, then there's no middle left. Right? There's only this ideological basis, reinforced by this media environment that does not allow compromise or really allow democracy to work. We also say in NDI, when we talk to people about how we make democracy stronger, we say that it is important that democracies be a country where the rule of law stands. To have rule of law, you have to have an independent judiciary. So it is why this amendment to ensure that judges in Montana are nonpartisan is so critical to being able to maintain an independent judiciary in a world that's becoming increasingly partisan. Then I want to say finally, we want to resist our temptation as liberals to say that felons cannot run for office. Because the first thing that autocrats do is disqualify their opponents, right? In Russia, it's easy. Putin just kills them. In Myanmar, Aung San Suu Kyi accused of corruption and jailed. In Turkey, Erdogan accusing his primary rival, the mayor of Istanbul, of corruption and ordering the judicial department to bring charges against him and jail him. Donald Trump accusing Senator Kelly of treason and saying that he should be jailed. Treason, right? The one thing in the United States Constitution that disqualifies you from running for office. So if we go down the path of saying felons should be disqualified from office, we enable autocrats to disqualify their opponents. We have to rely on the judgment of voters to disqualify people rather than allowing autocrats who control the judicial system, and if they create partisan judges to control the courts, to be able to disqualify opposition. Thank you.
Thank you, Dave. That gives us all to think about. Our next speaker is Morgan Taylor. Morgan Taylor is a seasoned public affairs and policy leader with over 25 years of global experience in the U.S. Foreign Service Office, Fulbright Fellow, a Peace Corps volunteer, and currently she serves as a director at Maximus. Morgan advances health literacy and shapes innovative policies that improve outcomes for people across the United States. Welcome, Morgan.
Thanks for having me, and really have appreciated all of the conversations I've gotten to listen to over the last couple of days, and I hope that I've been able to pull through some of the threads that we've been talking about through my examples. And today I'd like to focus on my experience living overseas, starting at the age of, well, really 16, but and then give some examples of the importance of citizen diplomacy and soft power through and then also the building blocks of democracy through some examples during my time in Central Asia over 16 years. So I'm a kid from Helena, Montana. I grew up there, and when I was 16, I participated in a State Department program called the German-American Partnership Program, where I went to Germany for a month, stayed with a family with 16 kids from America and 16 kids from Helena. And that really opened my whole entire world, and I never came back because the world was so exciting to me, and I had so much curiosity about it. And I really came to learn that you understand it by being it, by participating with people, by listening to them. And so that just set me off on a course where I had to go everywhere and see everything and talk to everyone. And as part of that, after I graduated from the University of Montana, I joined the Peace Corps. And I was sent to Kazakhstan at the age of 22, and I really didn't have much idea where it was on the map, but I knew it was part of the former Soviet Union. And I got there, and one of the first things I was doing was teaching at an English center where we had conversations to help people learn English. And the point of the Peace Corps, they say, is cultural exchange, teaching people about America, learning about other countries. And this group taught me so much. First of all, that Soviet Union was the first one to land on the moon, not the U.S. And examples like that really made me question how I viewed the world and what I was taught. And during that time, there were two very significant events that happened in the world in the year of 2000 and 2001. The first was the presidential election. And as an American living in a post-Soviet authoritarian country, you can imagine how difficult it became for me to be able to explain what was happening in the U.S. Bush versus Gore, hanging Chads, the Supreme Court deciding our elections. And that was, it was complicated for me because I was questioning myself, what I thought I knew about the world and about the United States, and then also trying to have discussions with people who grew up and had a history that was completely different. And one of my jobs was to be pushing American values on them. So it was hard. And then came September 11th, and I was actually at home with my parents in Billings when the towers came down. I was supposed to go back on September 13th. I went back a week later, and I was mostly just to get evacuated and have the experience of being evacuated, so I could have that story. But in Kazakhstan, the volunteers stayed. And we spent the next year watching how the war in Afghanistan, that Susan was there at a parallel time, watching how that started to, how our world had changed. For my folks, the city I lived in, Shymkent, Kazakhstan, flashed on the news every single time we were talking about going to war in Afghanistan. And it was that point that that really shaped the next 15 years of my career. And I'm going to jump around in time a little bit, but I'm hoping to pull through a couple of themes. But what came after September 11th really reshaped Central Asia's relationship with the United States and our foreign policy. And there were a lot of tensions that happened as this region became very strategically critical overnight. The Manas Air Base in Kyrgyzstan became one of the key transit hubs for Afghanistan operations. The U.S. needed access to airspace, supply routes, intelligence. And access meant relationships with governments that were not, by any honest measure, democratic. We needed them, and so we made compromises and we made deals. And my work would sit at this intersection for until I left the Foreign Service, with focusing on military support for Afghanistan, counter-Russian strategies, and democracy promotion. But first I came home after the Peace Corps trying to find a lens to understand what was happening in the world. So I went to graduate school for international development. And it was at this time that I discovered the framework that would kind of guide the way I did my career after that. And it was Paul Farmer's lessons on structural violence. That is the way I look at the world. That a lot of the way our systems are built and the harm that happens in the world is structural. It's not necessarily meant by bad actors, but it's caused by those systems, economic, political, social, cultural, historical. And in order to understand what's happening in a situation, you need to look at all of those different factors to unpack it, to try to really understand what's going on. And so I went back to Central Asia after graduate school on a Fulbright to study HIV/AIDS policy, because that was health at its core is all about structural violence. It's about who gets sick, who gets care, and why. And Kyrgyzstan, was more progressive than its neighbors at the time, and it had one of the most liberal policies on HIV/AIDS education. But while I was there, another thing happened. And it was, so that lens that I took about health relates to the democracy promotion. And so when I was there, the Kyrgyz had the tulip revolution, where they overthrew their government and pushed their president out. So I'm going to come back to that because it's a good example of how people come together. Dr. Gorley talked about it yesterday, about how people come together for freedom, and that's what happened during my time in Kyrgyzstan. But across these multiple countries over 16 years, I've watched authoritarian consolidation follow a recognizable pattern. It's never dramatic at first, it's incremental. It relies on people not noticing or not believing what they're seeing out their window until it's become too late. And so there's a couple of patterns that happen. First, it's always about the press and decreasing the influence of free media. It's not censorship by decree, that comes later. But first comes pressure, discrediting, economic strangulation, and a journalist becomes a problem, then a threat, then an enemy. And we saw this firsthand when I was with the State Department in Tajikistan. There was a young woman who was reporting on ISIS activity and how men were getting converted in Russia. And she started to get threats and death threats against her. So one of the things that we did through the Cultural Affairs Office was help get her out. We made phone calls and found her a scholarship to go to Germany, and she still lives there today. She's never been able to come home. And it's not a rescue story about one person, it's about a pattern. The logic that she was living inside was in Tajikistan was like, you tell the truth and you become a threat. And it's not just unique to Tajikistan. I think we're seeing it here in the United States, particularly with our first presentation today. The second move is on institutions, which I think Dave covered quite a bit. But what I watched in Kyrgyzstan under President Akayev in 2004 wasn't just about institutional weakness. It was about active manipulation. He was rigging elections and enhancing himself at the public expense. And then I'm going to skip ahead because I'm almost out of time. So I'm going to give some of my closing remarks. And so the last thing we saw that I wanted to talk about was when I was a Foreign Service officer at this Department of State. And we'd once again seen Kyrgyzstan overthrow their government. It actually happened when they were coming, President Bakiyev was coming for a multilateral event in the United States, and while he was in the air, he became no longer the president. And to tie back to what Susan was talking about, we got to go back to Kyrgyzstan as an international observer for their first parliamentary election. That was historic. It was the first democratic election in Central Asia ever. And so we got to be election observers and really see how important it was to the people to be so actively involved in their participating in their own government and in their own democracy. And it was messy, and they didn't quite get it right, and they're still learning. But it was the importance, I think we kicked off the conference with a quote from Joan Baez about action. And these people were taking action. They were sitting in their communities trying to figure out how to count votes and show the international community that they did it with integrity and that their election mattered and was legitimate. So I think those are really interesting examples over a long period of time about why democracy matters and why it's important for us to keep trying, and also being aware of the examples that happen overseas. Because structures are being moved right now in the courts, in the press, and it's a systematic defunding of democracy and exchange programs and USAID that is making us smaller and less free in the United States, but also all over the world. And so the lessons I took from Central Asia, and in those very brief examples I was able to share, is that it matters, our action matters, and we need to keep being active in order to protect what we have and in order to keep participating in the world. Thank you.
Thank you, Morgan. Those insights that you bring from abroad have a lot of relevance here today. We're going to now ask all of our participants, our three participants, to move over to the chairs. And I'll ask you, as you're moving over there, to think about if any of you have ideas that came up listening to your co-participants about our democracy, and if you would kind of reflect on those comments by the participants and react to them and share your thoughts with them. And I'm going to run over there with you. So, which one of the three of you would like to start first? And we're not.
Okay.
No, we're not quite ready for questions. That will be next. So, for the three of you, which one of you would like to start first about reflecting on the comments that each of you has made?
Let me just say, I think, both people have talked about USAID and the things we've done. I think what we've failed to do in America is to clearly tell people why what we're doing in foreign aid, why what we're doing in USAID is in the interest of America. The fact is, right, that peace is much less expensive than war. The fact is that democracies are much less likely to go to war. The fact is that countries with women leadership are much less likely to engage in hostilities than autocrats. Those things are all in America's interest because what we're doing in Iran, what we're doing with our military is expensive. Having relationships with democracies is in America's interest financially. It's in America's interest in having allies. I think we've failed to deliver that message in an effective way, and even at the micro level. I work with a program at the Mansfield Center. One of their participants is a medical doctor in the Philippines who runs an HIV center in the second largest city in the Philippines. His drugs to prevent HIV, all provided by USAID, now gone. He said to me, why does America no longer think that preventing AIDS in the Philippines is not in your interest, that it won't spread to America, that it won't spread to other people? It's those kinds of messages, I think, that we need to do a better job of convincing people that spending this money in foreign aid is in fact in our interest, and it does make America both stronger, but quite frankly, reduces the things that we have to spend money on in the long run.
I'll piggyback on that because I think Susan will be able to up on what I'm saying. One of the things is we're getting that message out about all the good things that the funding for international development does. It's also, there's a scary side to that. That it buys us influence. It buys people understanding the United States and its people a little bit more. I worked a lot on countering violent extremism over the course of my career. And one of the things that soft power buys is access to communities. That education piece, the economic stability that we're creating, the jobs, the farm equipment, allows people to stay at home. And what we saw in Tajikistan is the men couldn't stay at home. So they went to Russia where they became radicalized and ended up fighting with ISIS. And so there's all these circles that now that we've pulled out of all of these countries where we had those programs, we had those influences. The military runs programs similar to this too, but now we've opened this vacuum, or created a vacuum, where our security is at risk now because we no longer have access to those communities through our soft power, through all the good things that we're doing. That now we're inherently, I think our security is more threatened now, because now the countries that are filling those vacuums are countries like China, like Russia, like Iran. They're just filling those gaps that we've left by removing the aid that costs us very little. And I think you experienced that firsthand.
I would even go so far as to say one of the reasons that USAID was wiped off the map, along with Voice of America, is because of their support for democratic institutions. USAID was doing some serious work in Ukraine. After Yanukovych, the corrupt dictator that was there, USAID was supporting journalism in Ukraine, and they were able to successfully throw off their dictator, who was a Putin puppet. And then they had the people, they funded the effort to take all of Yanukovych's papers in his palace and scan them and put them online so that everybody in there, in that country, could read and find out what he was up to and just how corrupt he was. So, that striving toward transparency, I don't think Putin likes us very much.
Before we turn it over to questions from the floor, I'd like to ask one question of the panel. What do you think that we can do now, between now and the midterm elections and the presidential election a few years afterward, to protect our democratic institutions here in the United States? Do you have any insights on that?
It's a good question. I mean, I think the environment we're all in is difficult. I think we just have to not give up. I mean, that's what authoritarian regimes want people to do. They want people to think there's nothing they can do, that it's the way it is. I mean, I think what everybody in this room is doing, and others, is we have to fight for democracy. It is the line you said. It's a republic. If we can keep it, we have to keep it.
The two things that I think would be most important is really defending our election process and making it people. Sorry, I did this so much better answered in my head before I started talking. It's our election process that we really have to maintain the integrity of, and making sure that people can vote and stop putting the limitations on how people can vote. It goes back directly, I think, to witnessing elections that didn't work, and how in those authoritarian governments, they rig the elections, they make them go in their own favor. And it really is a powerful, it's where we express our voice and our choice of who we want to lead us and to guide us. And so, coming up to this next election, really inspired, by groups like Big Sky 55 Plus, my dad is a member, and making sure that people have a voice. And the other piece I would really be I forget the young man who spoke this morning what his name was, but that emphasis on access to independent media and free media. So those are my two things I think we should focus on.
And I guess I would add that just exactly what you're doing here today, coming to the conference, getting better information, creating community, taking it back to your home with you, and getting together with other folks there to talk about these kinds of things so that there's a little bit of doubt. And there's been kind of a crack created with the Epstein papers and the files, and I'm finding that some of the MAGA folks I know are expressing doubts and backing away a little bit. So this might be a good opportunity to start a dialogue.
Thank you. Those are all good comments. Can we open it up to the floor?
We were advised if we were going to ask a question to eventually get to the question. And I promise to do that as expeditiously as possible. I'm David Darby. First, I applaud both your comments this morning and, as it's been introduced, your work with soft power, which is underestimated in U.S. foreign policy, in my opinion. I had the privilege for 15 years of working as an advisor to countries in Eastern Europe before Soviet Union. Initially with the U.S. Treasury Department and later with USAID. And one of my first assignments, finally after going in and out of Ukraine for a couple of years, my wife and I moved to Kyiv, Ukraine in 1997. I had an office in the finance ministry building and advised them for about 2 years on their national budget. In doing that, I had a wonderful assistant who is now in England in her 3rd year of being a refugee. Her parents cannot return because they're elderly and have an apartment near the presidential offices in Kyiv. But I call her regularly, and I call contacts in Slovakia, Hungary, and Latvia mainly. But I called her the other day, and I did what somebody who has these contacts do now. I apologized for my country. And she said, "You know, David, it's okay, because we know that most Americans are good people. But we also know right now that you have a president who is corrupt, a racist, and a fascist. And so while we applaud the American people, we are sad because America was the country we could look up to as the great democracy, a country that tried to do good in the world. And now we can no longer rely on America or look up to it." Second, so you talked about USAID. The estimate is, 10 million lives will be lost between now and 2030 because of the abolishment of USAID. The majority will be children. And one group in Boston now says we've already hit 1 million. So I apologize for the preamble, but here is the question. If countries abroad can no longer look to America as the ideal or the epitome of democracy, or the golden city on the hill, and at the same time, if our soft power with USAID, a primary example, is being destroyed, and what do you see? This is the question. What do you see as the role for the United States to promote democracy in the world in this environment? Sorry about the length of the question.
Do you want to direct that to one of the three? Or Susan, perhaps you could address that first.
Well, I to start off with, I don't think we're going to do anything about it under this administration. I think it's just going to be step back and let Russia invade and take over Ukraine, and to step back and let these countries struggle along on their own.
I would say too, I'm still connected to my colleagues in the Foreign Service, and they're still overseas. The USA foreign officers are mostly gone, but they're still overseas, and we were taught, well, we signed up to support the United States no matter who was in the administration. And when Donald Trump first came in, everyone was, in 2016, we were all kind of really nervous about what was going to happen, but there were certain things that didn't change. You had career Foreign Service officers who were serving around the world who signed up to protect our Constitution and to promote American values. And foreign policy ebbs and flows and it changes. I think this period we've done some real damage, but you have people who, Foreign Service, I mean, I've talked to so many people in this room who have experiences overseas, working in different capacities, traveling, and it's that continuing to show up, to show what being an American and what's important to us in the good ways are, and having conversations, listening, and then also understanding that there are people who have committed their careers to this path who are still doing their jobs. Yes, the foreign policies up here that changes by administration, but there's day-to-day things that don't change, that people are still fighting for just much more quietly while we wait this out. And I think we've changed fundamentally. We're not going to go back and it's going to look different, but I don't think all hope is lost.
I think we have to take a position that that promoting democracy in the world is in our interest. I mean, I don't think Donald Trump believes in democracy in America, so why would he believe in democracy in Ukraine or other countries? I mean, we have to continue to promote democracy here and hold our elected officials to the position that supporting democracy in the world is in our interest.
Next question.
Yes,
Where are we?
right over here.
Yes.
My name is Carol Mick, and looked into a book called Strong Men from Mussolini Till Now, and it's kind of like a reference book. It's hard to read cover to cover, but you can look at all the despots and how they got in, how they developed, and everything and it's this textbook, and we're just putting our own. In fact, Trump is in it at the beginning, but we're now experiencing the biggest problem we've had as Americans when we've gone to these countries after we've blamed the people. You can't blame the people because we all can be, like we're finding out now, being led down a primrose path. So, and you just talked about what we need to do is get out the top hat and go down to the grassroots. Now I want to know, the question is, what ideas on how to do that? We need to organize, I think, all the people across the world to inter-network on those issues so that we have the power to take care of this. But how?
I wish we all had a good answer to that question. I mean, I kind of say, in my work for NDI, we don't have great big solutions. We can all just do the little things that we can do to make it better.
And don't underestimate the power of each one of us acting individually for the betterment of the world in those areas.
Thank you all. This question is for Dave, actually. And I had the privilege of speaking to some members of the Parliament in Exile through Dave in Myanmar, and it was a very humbling experience. But you brought up the issue of corruption. Well, all of you did, but, Dave and the government of Myanmar and other places are corrupt, and yet so are we. So my question becomes, how do we explain, or how do we engage with them on issues of their own corruption when such terrible things are happening here at home?
Well, that's a good question, and I think it is the most difficult thing for Americans to provide advice for, because we don't experience corruption in the same way that people do in other countries. In other countries, I mean, Ukraine being a great example where I've worked, in Myanmar, I mean, it is normal for people to have to pay a bribe to get their driver's license. It is normal for people to have to pay a bribe to get a government official to process a document. It is normal for people to be pulled over by a policeman and asked for a bribe, not to be withheld. We don't experience that. So when we go abroad and advise people about corruption, our reality is so much different than theirs. It's the one area where I think we aren't as effective because our reality is so different. Corruption is really not tolerated. I think at the granular level in Montana or in America, it's more sophisticated. My favorite little quote is that one of the party members who was running for parliament in Ukraine said to me, the problem in Ukraine is that oligarchs just use their money to buy themselves a seat in parliament. So how does it work in America? No, well, we're more sophisticated about it, but really, I mean.
Next.
I think.
Yeah,
that-
hi.
Oh, I'm sorry. I just wanted to
Go
say,
ahead.
we're not familiar with that kind of corruption now, but with the patronage system that's taken over Washington, D.C., and that's just like having a king where you owe your job to this person. You're not hired based on merit or your qualifications. They hand out the jobs to their friends. That's patronage. And then it'll creep its way down eventually unless we push her harder on the democratic issues.
Next question.
Yeah, hi, Seefeld. I want to go from the micro to the macro. Each one of you is an example of an individual doing things to promote democracy around the world. And so in our one family, when I was putting up solar panels on the ranch, my daughter Ricky was with Peace Corps in Kenya, like you and so many other people have been. And this school that she was teaching at, she put solar panels on the school so those kids could study at 4 o'clock in the morning when they had to get up and start doing their homework. So what's your vision for what we can do when we get control back in this country? And we are going to, because the masses, the superhero is already here. It's all of us. What are we going to do? How can we reinstitute these programs? Do we do it under the same names, or do we have to create new programs? How can we make them more enduring so the next Donald Trump that comes up, we can overwhelm that? So that's the question. What's the positive vision for these kinds of programs?
I mean, I really think the positive vision is we have to sell the programs to America. I mean, I think what we're doing, what USAID has done, and, the pro-democracy work and UNIRI, a very small piece of it. Really what USAID does is feed people and provide health care and provide education for women. Really much more impactful things in the long run. We have to tell people better than we've done. We've lost that ability of why is this in America's interest? Why is educating women in Afghanistan in the interest of America? Why is that putting America first? President Kennedy really said at the start of this, we have to tell people why it's in America's interest. We've lost that part of the mission. We have to do a better job of that because I believe educating women in Afghanistan is a good thing.
I think in some ways, I'm feeling much more positive about our state of our world than I thought I was. But this is a moment in time. And if I go back to 2000, when I first went to Central Asia, that was a moment in time where the world was falling apart also. We went to war. Our lives have, that moment changed my life, at least. I recognize that there are other big moments in history that have changed. But we've gone through them, and we've iterated, and we've changed. And, the State Department is still operating cultural exchanges. I think Dave works at World Montana, where A couple of years ago, we hosted, my husband and I hosted people from Tajikistan that were family members of the people I worked with when I was in the Foreign Service there. And so those bits and pieces of that cultural exchange that, like, we have to educate people in America about the importance of USAID and those sort of programs, but like, I think since the beginning of time, Susan showed kind of how people favored how much we paid for them. And you can say it's only half of 1% of, whatever the budget number is, that's extremely low. It's never really swayed people. But I think what sways people are opening your doors and hosting when those parliamentarians come from Tajikistan and learning about them. Steve's daughter is in the Peace Corps. I was in the Peace Corps because my parents were Vista volunteers. I joined the Foreign Service because at Mansfield Metcalf one year, I was 18 years old, and there was a diplomat who was back in Montana, I can't remember his name, sat next to me with my family, and I was like, what do you mean that I could do this for a living? Like, so it's those little things that, like, it's dire, they've cut things, but we've come back from that. We'll rebuild in a different way, because I do believe that it's a value that not all Americans hold, but a lot do, because we believe in that engagement with the world.
And to that, it's worth noting that experience in foreign countries seems to be very motivating and engaging and providing meaning to what people do with their lives. And I think it's worth, encouraging in your grandchildren and things like that. But I think that we have to get money out of politics in the United States. Number one, I love the Montana plan. I've got great hopes for it. I know there are 24 at least other countries who are picking up on that to do the same thing. If we can't get rid of Citizens United, this is the next best deal. And then to keep them from changing the elections, making it harder to vote, the ballots. Why can't we, as senior citizens, not being able to mail in the ballot means you've got to wait in line for hours. It's just awful. So keep them from chipping away at these ballot initiatives, these little things meant to keep people from voting. Open it up instead of taking it away. And then I guess the last thing would be, I forgot, so.
Thank you. I think we've got